intelligence, really smart man. His wife died, and emotionally he could not handle that. And he was drinking himself to death. Lanny would also often blow a .48. He was in and out of the hospital constantly, which as taxpayers we pay for.
Well, he's gone. He's gone. He's gone. He's out hiding.
You know, when I was talking to this morning, I was trying to get, where did you go?
Whoa, 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 whoa. It's him.
Where?
Right here, right up there.
Right up there to your right.
Yeah.
Want to stop?
Yeah, but pull up. Let him just go.
Because you're you're going to make me cry, Randy. Because you're making me cry.
I love you too, Manny.
I don't know anything that tell me really help me with anything else.
Well, we're close. We're closest we've been in 3 years to get you into housing. We're the closest we've been.
I was a street outreach worker, and our mission in that previous program was to identify people that were particularly vulnerable because of their mental illness or addiction, and if we felt they might be a danger to people, we would take them to Bellevue Hospital. 2 or 3 weeks after the hospitalization, that same person would be back on the street. The repetition of that cycle began to be very disturbing and began to raise a number of questions of like, what are we doing? Maybe you have a little short-term gain, but that person just spent 30 days in the hospital. At $1,500 a day, that's $45,000. We could have bought them a condo, certainly paid the rent for a long time. What we decided to do was to start listening to the people on the street and take our cue about what to do from them. It led very, very quickly to the idea that housing is the most important thing to a homeless person, regardless of mental illness or addiction or anything else. And once they're housed, they'll consider maybe treatment, maybe reconnecting with family, maybe having their kids come back, maybe looking for a job. But the first response was always housing.
Here we are in Lanny's new apartment, and he actually went and did put all his cupboards and stuff away. That's pretty amazing, man. And how long has it been since you've had an apartment?
Oh, seems like a century.
A century? Well, almost has, because you were homeless since 2002.
Right.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is.
So, how are you feeling?
Elated. Very good.
Yeah, it hasn't hit me yet.
I feel human again.
You feel human again. How did getting a set of keys make you feel different?
That I was finally home. I was finally in a place where I can start focusing on bettering myself.
The remarkable thing was that people did so well. People, once housed, began to have a life, even though they still suffered with addiction and mental illness. People have a functional ability that is quite separate from their diagnosis, it turns out. You can believe that the government is after you, or that there are people flying in from outer space and they're going to take over the planet. And leaving all that aside, you can still go get a ham and cheese sandwich and some french fries and have a meal or go shopping and all of that. They are like two hands doing independent things. So that was a great surprise, and I think most gratifying was the fact that people can get housed immediately from the street, and they can be supported to keep that housing.
Lanny went from the streets, from drinking a .48 to his own little apartment and immediately sober. I mean, it's called dignity, privacy, and having a... If you're going to the bathroom behind a McDonald's dumpster, you might as well have a beer. And I'm not advocating, I have 24 years sober, I'm not advocating for drug use or alcoholism. I'm just saying, let's put it in perspective. Homelessness, life sucks. It's nearly impossible to stay sober when you're homeless. And we know how to end homelessness. We do. We've known for a long time. There's just not the public or political will to do it. That's where you guys all come in. I don't know what's going on here locally, but the battle of homelessness really is federal and local, because lack of affordable housing and different issues, and your voice matters. It really, really matters. And we know we can end homelessness and save your money, save taxpayer money at the same time. This is Joseph. When Joseph came to us, he had maggots in his leg. He had been outside for 13 years. So the first thing, and this is before Housing First and all this housing stuff came about. It was right at the beginning of it. And Joseph came to us. First thing we did was take him to the hospital. And I thought, I'd been doing this for a while, and I was actually homeless, so I thought Joseph would just be exited from the hospital and go back outside. And I literally tried to talk him. I'd say, Joseph, milk it. Oh my gosh, cough, do whatever. You got I Love Lucy on the TV. You got nurses bringing you food. Stay here. It was breaking my heart that he was going to go back outside. So a coworker, had found a loophole in some grant, and we were able to pay for rent for Joseph. And this is his first state in 13 years. Look at that smile. Amazing. So 2 weeks later, I took him to Bob's Big Boy, which is a hamburger joint, and I asked him to smile, and he said no, and I asked him why, and he said, because you're not buying me steak. True story. So we're crowdfunding for a book. If you are interested in a little more of my story and what's going on, invisiblepeople.tv/book. And I stay as long as you want and answer questions. But thank you very much for having me.
Is providing housing a realistic solution if by some miracle we had enough local and federal money to simply put up apartments for the homeless people to stay there? Is that going to solve the homelessness problem?
So, great question. And I personally don't believe we can build ourselves out of homelessness. We have to use both new construction, and I'm sure there's abandoned buildings and maybe even hotels that have been, run down that could be converted into efficiency. We have to be creative.
I have talked with friends about this several times, and the naysayers say, no, they won't stay there because they can't do drugs there. No, they won't stay there because they're mentally ill. So what I'm asking is, how much will this help if we simply have?
I got it. And just so you know, most people that do drugs are already in housing. They never end up homeless. Most people with mental illness have homes. This idea of, oh my gosh, they're going to go into a house and do drugs. Most people do their drugs inside a house, right? We're complaining that they're doing drugs outside. Sorry, I got a little passion on this one. We're complaining that they're doing drugs outside, and now we're going to complain that they're out of sight and they're doing drugs. So the point, like with the Housing First, is without dignity, without a place to heal, because people do drugs to escape pain. Like John earlier, his mom tried to drown him when he was 5.
Right.
You use drugs to escape that pain. Mm-hmm. And we need to treat that. You don't treat the addiction, you treat the pain that they're using in a house is so important. A house is so important to healthcare, to go down that path. But it's all the above. Number one, we have to we have to really focus on prevention. We have to stop people from becoming homeless in the first place. Number two is shelters that have a path to housing. Shelters are still important, but there has to be a path into housing, otherwise they're just warehousing, like you saw. We just can't warehouse people. So prevention, shelters, path to housing. And housing has to come with services. So if you're housing somebody that has an addiction problem, there is recovery services that are offered. What we've learned is you can't mandate. How many of you have been forced to do something and you ended up, right? I mean, maybe when we were kids, your parents forced you to do the dishes, or they tried to bribe you with an allowance or something, right? But as an adult, nobody can force you to do anything. But we say, oh, we're going to force the addicts into recovery. No, it has to be their choice. There's actual data that if I'm an addict or if I have mental illness, if you force me, it's not going to stick. But if I go on my own, so housing first, but the housing has to have support services. It has to have recovery services included with it. It's not just a box. It is a place for them to heal with professionals visiting on a regular basis. And if the person wants to go into treatment, or if the person wants to go into a mental health services, they're not only allowed, but encouraged, but it's their choice. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I mean, obviously, it's something. The thing that I'm concerned about is I've heard figures like maybe 60-70% of the homeless are mentally ill. I have dealt with that in my own family. Many of those people don't want help. They refuse help. Then what?
Well, 100% of people, 100% will go into housing if it's the right housing. Your number is extremely high. 1.3 million homeless people are under the age of 6, so they don't have mental illness. And if you look at a whole, if you look at, I don't know if there's a Skid Row area here, but if you look at the Tenderloin in San Francisco, if you look at Skid Row in Los Angeles, there's an extreme high concentration of addiction and mental illness, where you would have 50, 60, 60%. Normal average is around 20%, I think 27% of addiction, mental health, but it varies by community and local, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But if it's the right housing, 100% of the people, like Lanny was mental illness and addiction, but when it was housing on his terms, he went in. Mm-hmm. And it's been proven time and time that housing with services, I gotta stress, it has to have support services, saves lives and saves money.
Thank you.
No, thank you, great question.
So how are all of the agencies and departments that are around to help people, like the education department and the department of mental health services and hospitals and housing, they seem to work sort of in like their own little bubble. How well are they like communicating to make sure that all of these moving pieces to get people to where they need to be to survive in life, how well are they communicating?
Yeah, I'm blown away. Two great questions right out the bat. So, are you familiar with the continuum of care or coordinated entry? Just our government mandates that you have a COC, a continuum of care. And what it is meant to do is that we work on the problem as a whole. So that you have the education, you have the police, you have the fire, you have mental health services, you have everybody at the table working together. Problem is, and this is why I'm still spiritual and believe in God, is we're humans and we don't always work together, you know? We all have egos and pride and all this other stuff. And the nonprofit sector is not really set up for collaboration. We'll shake each other's hands at the gala and say, gosh, We love what you're doing. Then behind the scenes, we fight for the same scraps from the same donors, right? So what they've tried to do, at least in homeless services, are you familiar with coordinated entry? So coordinated entry has been the new thing for a while. In some communities it works, some communities like New York City, it's a disaster for some of the reasons I just stated. Coordinated entry, it used to be you would go to the Salvation Army and that was where you would connect and get services. And you might not get that path to housing. Wherever you were, whether it be Catholic Charities or a mission or whatever services, that is where you would get the help. Coordinated entry developed a coordinated database where housing, so now how it's supposed to work is if you go to Salvation Army, you get in the coordinated entry list, and then they're supposed to route you to where you fit, where in this continuum of care you will get the best services. Sadly, what's happened is there's not enough housing. There's more in Los Angeles right now. They are housing 130 people a day, more than they've ever housed. They housed 20,000 people last year, a record. They're doing a great job. There's 350 new people entering into homelessness every single day. So as they're, it's like bailing out the Titanic, you know what I mean? It's an area that needs more attention. I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know if you know this, I'm pretty sure you do, but our government has two different definitions of homelessness. The HUD, Housing, Urban, and Development, has one definition that says there's roughly around 580,000 homeless people outside. And then they count one day a year in January, coldest month, where every homeless person will do whatever they can to get on a couch. But they don't count couch surfing. It's called cooking the books. And then you have the Department of Education that counts homeless kids every single school day. And the Department of Education says there's 1.5 million homeless kids. So that's roughly, so you have these two government, Department of Education, Housing, and Urban Development using two definitions of homelessness, saying we're going to end it. That's ridiculous. And there's something called the Homeless Children's Youth Act that I support, which forces HUD to use the same definition of the Department of Education. But the people the special interest groups over here are fighting that. They're worried that their money is going to go to families. Well, I believe if a community should be able to decide what their needs are. So if St. Paul, if the issue is more chronic homelessness, then the funding should go to ending chronic homelessness. But if the issue is kids doubling up or in weekly rate hotels or in really horrible situations, the community should decide how that funding should be. We should, I call it people first. Be concerned about people, not your model. And this is where pride and ego comes in, because everybody's dug in. They're saying, no, our model. No, we can't. Those they're not homeless. They're just, gosh. There's a term they use that I can't even say it, because how do you say it because it's kids. How do you say it with a straight face? I really don't have an answer. It's something that we all need to work on, as you've probably seen, which is why you asked. Here, I'm sorry, it's booming here, and I have bad hearing for.
I always feel like the message gets lost, it always seems to be presented as more liberal cause that many of us are probably here to go and fight for or talk about those things. Like what I talk about is try to change people's minds, I guess. It's a completely conservative issue. Like you said, it costs $162,000 in New York City in prison homes.
In the 80s, HUD cut $15 billion worth of affordable housing funding. That hasn't been restored. $15 billion under Reagan of affordable housing funding. And I won't get political, but it's just a fact. There wasn't even chronic homelessness. Almost overnight, these mega shelters, mega nonprofits were created because if you cut affordable housing like that, all of a sudden you create street homelessness. And we're seeing parts of that. The other is rents have gone up 75% in the last 5 years. So until that money, and right now the Trump administration, it won't pass, but his budget is trying to cut another $8 billion from HUD funding. It won't pass, but they submitted that. And it is. I mean, you're right. But I just want to, I don't think it's a left, right, conservative, Democrat. It's all of us. And there is a serious issue, and it even goes back to what we're just talking about getting together. I mean, we live in this polarized world now that, you know, people don't even, they yell at each other and they argue, but nobody's listening. And it really is, we're all Americans. It's not, you know, either side. We all got to, you know, work together to end this thing, so.